Okay, YouTube. I'm going to talk about the 2015 12-inch Retina MacBook. So let's get into it. Okay, so here you can see the new MacBook. This is the gold one right here. It's got an interesting keyboard. I kind of hate these keys because they have no indentation. This is running OS X El Capitan version 2. Let me focus here. All right. You can see Retina MacBook. All right. It's got a 1.1 gigahertz Intel Core M processor, 8 gigabytes of 1600 megahertz DDR3 RAM, Intel HD graphics 5300, and there's the serial number that I don't care all that much about on this. It has a 2K Retina display, which is pretty nice for something this small. It's got 250 gigabytes of storage on an SSD hard drive, obviously, because you cannot fit an HDD inside of this tiny little thing. And if you look over here, we have a black MacBook, which is the same one I have, same model. And this is the MacBook that was killed in 2008, but then brought back in 2015 into the gold thing that you see now, that you just saw on the table there. It became the gold thing. And I think it's kind of sad in a way, but then it kind of makes up for it in other ways. Like, for instance, the older MacBook is more powerful than the newer MacBook. The one that's like almost 10 years older. The MacBook that is 9 years older than the current MacBook is faster than the current MacBook. In fact, there's computers from 2000 that are faster than the new MacBook. It is by no means impressive in power, but it is very small, very light, so it's good for portability. It is passively cooled, which means that it has no ventilation. Okay, that doesn't mean that. It means that there's no mechanical components cooling the computer. The computer's kind of cooling itself in a way. And the way it does that is through the chassis of the machine. The computer's chassis is what helps it cool it. It's kind of like a heat sink. So it is passively cooled. There are no fans in it whatsoever. And so there are no fans in it. It is cooled through the chassis, which means all of the heat that comes off the processor is dispersed through the chassis, but it is a small processor. It's like the kind of processor that would go on a phone. In fact, my phone's processor is more powerful than this thing. So yeah, this thing's not very powerful, but it does also have some heat issues like the other MacBook. My black MacBook does have some heat problems if I try to do things that are GPU intensive, because the Intel GMA GPU in this thing gets really hot. Like if I try loading YouTube videos, it gets a little warm. It can handle 480 videos and just the fan will rev up a little and it'll get a little toasty, but 720p is out of the question. You cannot load a 720p video, otherwise the thing will overheat. And I don't know if it shuts itself down when it overheats, because I've heard that fan get freaking loud and it felt really hot, and I don't like it when that happens, because it's not good for the computer for it to get that hot. I mean, when you think about it, if you just simply think about it, the heat wouldn't hurt anything, but then when you start getting more into it, you think there are low melting solder points. There are also some components that can't get hot because they're just not, it also slows down the computer, because more heat means more resistance. So the board becomes more electrically resistant if it gets really hot, and so the computer will also run slower. So a hot computer is not a good thing. That's why you always want to keep it cool. Also, a CPU and GPU can melt to the board. Not good. I don't know about the GPU, but the CPU can definitely melt to the board. So they do both kind of have a heat problem. I recommend, if you get the new MacBook, that you do not use it for long periods of time in direct sunlight, because the whole body is basically the heatsink that cools the processor, and if the heatsink gets hot and then it's trying to, the processor's trying to take the heat away and displace it through the chassis, and then the chassis is hot, so then that thing's just like a big fireball in your lap. Not literally, but it will get very hot and it'll probably ruin your new MacBook. The thing now, I don't think this is a bad computer. I think if it was $1,000 cheaper than it actually is, it would be a pretty cool little machine. The thing that I really hate about this machine, and I think that's why it's going to be a major failure, I really don't know if it's a success right now. They're still selling it, and it's been almost a year since it came out. So, I don't know. I guess we'll just have to see, but the 2.2 gigahertz version is $1,500. I can get a MacBook Pro for $1,200 that's better than that thing in every way. I mean, it's a little thicker and a little heavier, but it's still a pretty thin and pretty light machine. I mean, the MacBook Pro is by no means a super thick or heavy computer. It's pretty light. So, I think it's kind of worthless because it's overpriced. But it would be a good little machine for someone who cares a lot. I mean, like, who's obsessive about computer portability, because it is incredibly portable. Most of the interior is batteries, but somehow it can still only get a 9-hour battery life. I mean, that's still pretty big battery life, but there's been more battery life from less batteries. I mean, almost the entire inside of that computer is batteries. The logic board is like, hold on. Never mind, I was going to get a RAM stick, but I have it nailed to my wall. Anyways, the logic board is about the size of a RAM stick. Here's a picture of that. So, it's not very big at all. So don't think that it's so thin and it's so great, so it must be incredibly powerful because it's Apple and I'm a stupid hipster. It's just because it's small doesn't mean it's powerful. Okay, I don't know why people think that. They think that just because something's small, it's a really good thing to have, when that just simply isn't true. There's not a lot of space for a good CPU on something that small. There's not a lot of space for a good GPU. I have no idea what that thing's RAM situation is. I mean, it's custom RAM for sure. I know that. But, and I don't even know where the hell the hard drive is on that thing where you can fit a hard drive, because if almost all of the inside of it is batteries, then I guess you just have the logic board, but Apple usually integrates the hard drives onto the logic board through like an PCIe M.2 slot or something like that. But I don't see how they could do this, so it must be separate somewhere else on the board, in the computer, so I don't know how they're able to do that, but I will say that hard drive space on those things are not very big. I think the biggest hard drive that is available on the computer is like 500 gigabytes or something like that, which is kind of small, you know? It'll do good, but it's kind of small. Yeah, so another thing about this computer is it has USB Type-C port, which is kind of an upside and a downside to this machine. This, I like it personally. I think it's really cool. I think the problem is that there's only one of them. There needs to be at least 2 or maybe 3. Fuck, make 4, you know? Because this port controls everything on the computer. It's how you charge your computer. It's where you plug in your mouse. It's where you plug in your flash drive. But another problem is it's Type-C. Flash drives, mice, keyboards, and peripherals like that use Type-A. So you will have to buy an adapter. You absolutely have to buy an adapter. Unless they make a USB Type-C mouse, but then you still can't charge your computer and use the mouse at the same time. So you will have to get a hub of some sort, like you see here, that plugs into the computer. And then you'll just have to use it like that. But then you're kind of, it doesn't matter how thin it is if you have to carry this big brick with you. So that is a disappointing thing, but the cool thing is how it's just, you can do almost anything with a USB-C port. I just think they need to include the adapters with this enormous price, and they also need to include more ports on the computer, because one port is not enough, and then forcing people to buy all these brick of a hub things. Okay, unless you include the headphone port is on the machine. It does not transfer headphone signal or whatever it's analog, so it does have a headphone port, so I shouldn't say it's the only port, but for extra peripherals like another display or a keyboard and mouse, it's got a keyboard, but I guess a mouse, you'd have to buy an adapter or a hub. And also, if you wanted to connect to Ethernet, you'd have to buy an adapter as well, which is actually, well, now that I think about it, I don't know if it does have Ethernet. I think that computer solely works over Wi-Fi. I mean, everybody has Wi-Fi now. I don't know who doesn't have Wi-Fi, but, you know, Ethernet's still good. You know, there's still people who depend on Ethernet and need it because, I don't know, like for instance, schools. Whenever I take my computer to school, I always try to plug into Ethernet because our school Wi-Fi sucks, but for some reason Ethernet's better. I guess it's the routers they get. They're just shit or something. And there's not that many of them. So that's where Ethernet would come in handy, but if I had this new MacBook, I'd be shit out of luck. So, yeah. The trackpad. This computer's trackpad, from what I've heard, it does not click at all. You just put some pressure onto it, and then that's how you click, which is, I don't know, that might be an up or a down for you. I personally think it's cool, but I've never used something like that, so I don't know how I would get used to it, but you wouldn't have to put your cursor on something and then click. You could just put your cursor on it and then push down a little, and then you've clicked. Kind of like a little touch screen, but I guess that's the closest Apple's going to get to touch screens on computers, huh? So, yeah, you can also change the intensity of it so it's really light, and you can also make it so you can be a little more forceful, which, you know, it's a cool trackpad. Trackpad, keyboard. Alright, I think that's it. Goodbye.
Correct and will give the